H1. I gave soup to a starving alien child. She returned with a secret no one expected. H2. Part 1. The Wasteland Between Stars. Veyrath Station sat at the edge of everything. It was not a beautiful place. It was not an important place. It was just a place where people ended up when they had nowhere better to go. The air recyclers hummed all day and all night, and the walls were the color of old rust, and the hallways smelled like machine oil and instant coffee. There were about 300 people living there, give or take, depending on the season and who had left and who had arrived. They were miners, engineers, traders, and farmers. They were people who had tried other places and found that other places had not worked out for them. Nathan Cole was one of those people. He was 38 years old, with short brown hair that had started going gray at the sides, and hands that were rough from years of work. He had spent 11 years as a field medic in the colonial military, patching people up in places that no one back home could find on a map. After that, he had come to Veyrath Station because a friend told him there was a job coordinating supply shipments, and because he was tired and needed something quieter. The job was not exciting. He tracked food, medicine, tools, and fuel. He made sure the right boxes went to the right people. He filed reports. He drank too much coffee. He was not a man who thought of himself as special. He was just a man who did his job and went home and heated up whatever he had in the kitchen and went to sleep. That was his life, and it was fine. The night everything changed started like every other night. Nathan had finished his shift and was walking back through the outer cargo corridor, the long tunnel that connected the main station to the landing pads. It was cold out there. The heating units in that section had been broken for 2 weeks, and the repair order kept getting pushed down the list. Nathan had his jacket zipped to the chin and was thinking about whether he had any bread left at home when he heard the sound. It was small. A scraping sound, like something dragging itself across the metal floor. He stopped walking. He stood still and listened. The corridor was dim, lit only by the yellow emergency strips along the base of the walls. There were rows of stacked cargo containers on both sides, big gray boxes strapped to pallets. The sound was coming from somewhere between two of them. Nathan did not run. He moved slowly and carefully, the way he had been trained to move when he did not know what he was walking toward. He pulled his small flashlight from his jacket pocket and turned it on. Between two containers, pressed into the narrow gap like it was trying to disappear, was a child. Not a human child. It was a Keth. Nathan had seen Keth before, but only in photographs and briefings, and once through a thick window at a diplomatic outpost. They were tall creatures usually, with smooth gray skin and 4 long arms and large dark eyes set wide apart on a narrow face. This one was small, clearly young, and clearly in very bad shape. Its gray skin had patches of a darker color that Nathan recognized immediately, bruising or something like it. One of its forearms was bent at an angle that was not right. Its eyes were half closed, and its breathing was shallow and fast. It looked up at him when the flashlight found it. It did not run. It did not make a sound. It just looked at him with those wide dark eyes, and Nathan could see that it was too weak to do anything else. He clicked the flashlight off. He crouched down slowly, making himself small, making himself less of a threat. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay. I am not going to hurt you." He did not know if it understood him. He kept his voice low and calm and steady, the same way he had talked to injured soldiers who were too scared to let him help them. He assessed what he could see from a distance. The arm was the worst visible injury. There might be more he could not see. The child was malnourished. That was obvious from the way its ribs showed through its thin gray skin. It had been out here for a while, maybe days. The temperature in this corridor at night dropped to near freezing. Nathan made a decision. He knew the protocol. He was supposed to contact the Interspecies Liaison Office and file a report, and wait for them to send someone. He knew that. He also knew the liaison office was understaffed and backed up, and that the nearest officer with Keth clearance was at a station 4 hours away, and would not arrive until the following evening at the earliest. He did not think this child would last until the following evening. He took off his jacket and held it out, not draping it over the child, but just holding it out in the space between them, letting the child see what it was. Then he placed it gently on the floor and slid it forward a little and stepped back. He waited. The child looked at the jacket. Then it looked at him. Then very slowly, with one of its working arms, it pulled the jacket toward itself. Nathan exhaled. He sent a quick message to the station's medical log, noting that he had found an injured juvenile alien and was taking her to his quarters for emergency stabilization. He used the word emergency stabilization because it was accurate, and because it was the kind of language that made filing a report later easier. Then he put his comm unit away and carefully, slowly helped the child to her feet. She leaned against him as they walked. She was heavier than she looked. Nathan kept one hand near her back, without touching her, ready to catch her if she fell, and he walked slowly and kept his eyes ahead and said nothing. One room, with a cot, a small kitchen area, a bathroom the size of a closet, and a chair he had dragged in from the common area years ago. He sat the child down on the floor near the heating unit, which worked, and turned it up as high as it would go. Then he went to the kitchen and put water on to boil. He did not have much. He had dried protein noodles, a few cans of preserved vegetables, some spices, and the bones of a chicken he had cooked 3 days ago that he had been meaning to throw away. He put the bones in the water and let them boil, and added salt and a little of the vegetables, and let it all simmer while he went to his med kit. He cleaned the child's visible wounds as gently as he could, using the basic antiseptic wipes that were standard in any colony kit. He did not try to set the arm. He was not a surgeon. He stabilized it as best he could with a strip of medical foam padding and a soft wrap, and hoped that was enough for now. The child watched him the whole time. She did not pull away. She did not make a sound. When the broth was ready, Nathan poured it into a bowl and set it on the floor in front of her, and sat down across from her on the floor himself, his back against the opposite wall. He did not gesture at the bowl. He did not push it toward her. He just sat there and waited, and let her decide. She stared at the bowl for a long time. Then she picked it up with her 2 good arms, and she drank. Nathan watched her and said nothing, and felt something settle in his chest that he had not felt in a long time. Not pride exactly, not satisfaction, just the quiet, certain feeling of a thing being right. He did not ask her who she was, or where she had come from, or what had happened to her. Those questions could wait. Everything else could wait. I gave soup to a starving alien child. She returned with a secret no one expected. Part 2. What it means to owe nothing. The first 3 days were the hardest. The child had a fever. Nathan was not a Keth doctor. He did not know what a fever meant in a Keth body, or whether the medicines in his kit would help her or hurt her. He sent an encrypted message to a contact he had from his military days, a woman named Carol Sims, who had worked in interspecies field medicine for over a decade. Carol sent him back a list of things to watch for, and told him to keep the child warm and hydrated, and not to give her anything designed for human biology. Nathan followed every instruction carefully. He took shifts sleeping in the chair, so he could check on her through the night. He kept a small pot of plain broth on the burner at a low heat, ready whenever she was able to drink. He kept the room quiet and warm. He spoke to her in a low voice sometimes, not because he thought she understood him, but because he had learned a long time ago that the sound of a calm voice could matter, even when the words did not. On the 4th day, the fever broke. The child sat up on her own and looked around the room with clear, steady eyes for the first time. She looked at the walls. She looked at the small window, which showed the black of space and the distant gray edge of a nearby moon. She looked at the medkit lying open on the floor. And then she looked at Nathan, who was sitting in his chair drinking coffee and pretending to read a supply report. He looked up. They looked at each other for a moment. Then Nathan stood and went to the kitchen and came back with a bowl of broth and a plate of soft flat bread that he had made that morning, because he thought she might be able to eat something more solid. He set both on the floor in front of her and went back to his chair. She ate everything, not because it was her name, but because her real name was a long sound that his mouth could not shape correctly, no matter how many times he tried. And she had made a short clicking sound the first time he attempted it, that he had decided to interpret as gentle correction. Saya was the closest approximation he could manage. She did not seem to object. On the 5th day, Diane Holt came to his door. Diane was the station administrator, a 52-year-old woman with sharp gray eyes and the permanent expression of someone managing too many problems at once, which was accurate. She was not unkind. She was just practical in the way that people who run small, remote outposts have to be practical, which sometimes looked like hardness from the outside. She stood in the doorway and looked past Nathan at Saya, who was sitting on the floor near the heating unit, watching them both. "You filed it as emergency medical stabilization," Diane said. "It was," Nathan said. "The liaison officer in Sector 9 is asking questions." "She was dying in the cargo corridor," Nathan said. "I did not have time for a 4-hour wait." Diane was quiet for a moment. "The Keth Conclave does not like unofficial contact with their minors," she said. "They especially do not like it when it happens in human territory without a signed protocol agreement." "She was a child who needed food and a warm place," Nathan said. "I know that," Diane said. "I am not arguing with what you did. I am telling you that there are people out there who will argue with it. You need to be careful." Nathan nodded. Diane looked at Saya one more time, then back at Nathan. "Keep the paperwork current," she said. "I will do what I can on my end." She left. Saya watched the door close. Then she looked at Nathan. He shrugged and went to make more coffee. Over the following days, Saya began to move around the room. Her arm was healing well enough that she could use it carefully, and her strength was coming back steadily. She moved quietly, the way Keth moved when they were not trying to make themselves known. But she watched everything. Nathan noticed that she did not just look at objects. She watched the people she could see through the window, or when Nathan occasionally let her sit near the open corridor door in the late evenings when foot traffic was low. She watched Kevin, a 16-year-old kid who worked part-time in the supply bay, and who had taken to stopping by Nathan's section every day at lunch. On the 3rd day of Saya sitting near the doorway, Kevin noticed her and stopped walking and stared. Then Nathan told him to stop staring. Kevin apologized quickly and then pulled a small wrapped piece of bread from his jacket pocket and set it just inside the doorway and walked away without another word. Saya stared at the bread for a long time. Nathan picked it up and handed it to her. She took it, but she kept looking down the corridor in the direction Kevin had gone, with an expression that Nathan could not read, but that seemed like confusion, deep, genuine confusion. That evening she made a sound, not a word in any language he recognized, but a questioning sound, directed at him. She gestured toward the door with one arm, and then made a gesture that seemed to include just the two of them and then the empty space of the corridor. Nathan thought about it. "Why do people help each other?" he said. She did something with her eyes that might have been a nod. Nathan leaned back in his chair and thought about how to answer that with no shared language. He got up and went to the kitchen and opened a cabinet and took out the last of his coffee, the good kind, the kind he ordered only once a month and that he had been saving. He made 2 cups. He brought one back and set it in front of Saya and sat down with the other. She looked at the cup. He held his own cup up slightly, the way you do when you are sharing something. She understood that gesture. She picked up her cup slowly and held it the same way. Nathan drank. After a moment, she drank too. She made a sound, short, surprised, not unpleasant. Nathan smiled. That was not an explanation. It was not a philosophy lesson. It was just 2 cups of coffee, shared in a small warm room on the edge of space. But Saya held her cup for a long time after she finished. turning it slowly in her 4 hands, and she looked at it as though it had told her something she was still working out how to believe. Nathan watched her, and thought that maybe the answer to her question was already somewhere inside that moment. He was not a smart man, or a deep thinker. He just knew that when there was enough of something good, the right thing to do was share it. He did not say any of that. He just got up and offered her the last piece of flatbread. She took it, and this time without hesitation. Outside, the stars were very far away, and the station hummed and rattled around them like it always did. And somewhere in the growing quiet of that small room, something was shifting in Seiya that neither of them could name yet. I gave soup to a starving alien child. She returned with a secret no one expected. Part 3. The Conclave Comes Knocking. The ship arrived on a Tuesday morning. Nathan was in the middle of a supply count when his comm unit buzzed with an alert from the station's outer sensor grid. He looked at the readout. The vessel was large, dark gray, and built in the angular style that was immediately recognizable to anyone who had spent time near Keth space. It was a conclave diplomatic cruiser, the kind that came with formal authority and formal expectations, and no patience for complications. Nathan set down his clipboard and went to find Diane. She had already seen it. They sent 3 envoys, she said, standing at the window of her office with her arms crossed and her jaw tight. The lead one carries a conclave arbiter seal. That is not a minor official, Nathan. That is someone with the power to issue detainments and file interstellar grievances. They came for Seiya, Nathan said. Of course they came for Seiya, Diane said. She is a Keth miner who has been in an unauthorized human residence for 12 days. From their point of view, that is a serious matter, regardless of your intentions. Nathan looked out the window at the cruiser docked at the far landing pad. It dwarfed every other ship at the station. What happens when they take her? That is not our business, Diane said carefully. Our business is to cooperate with the Conclave Protocol, and to document that you acted in good faith as a medical responder. Nathan nodded slowly. He did not say what he was thinking. What he was thinking was that Seiya had arrived alone and injured and half frozen, and nobody from the Conclave had been anywhere nearby. And the question of where she had come from, and how she had ended up in a cargo corridor at the edge of human space, had never been answered. He went back to his quarters and told Seiya the envoys had come. She had heard the alert from the sensor grid, just as he had. She was sitting up straight on the floor with her 4 arms folded in a formal posture that Nathan had not seen her use before. Her expression was different too. Not afraid exactly, but still controlled, like a door that had been carefully closed. You do not have to go with them today, Nathan said. The formal handover process takes several hours. You have time. Seiya looked at him. Then she did something she had never done before. She reached out with one of her upper arms and touched his wrist, very briefly, and made a low, soft sound that he had come to understand as something close to, "Thank you," though he suspected the full meaning was more complicated than that. Then she stood up. She was taller than she had been 12 days ago, better fed, stronger. She still moved carefully because of the arm, but she moved with something Nathan could only describe as purpose. The formal meeting was held in the station's main reception bay, a big open room that was normally used for unloading cargo inspections. Someone had cleared the center and set up a table and chairs, though the Keth envoys did not sit. They stood in a line with their arms folded in formal posture, their ceremonial robes dark and precise, their expressions giving away nothing. The lead envoy, the one Diane had called the Arbiter, was older than the other 2, with deep lines on his gray face and eyes that were sharp and cool. He was the kind of person, Nathan thought, who had been doing this job for a very long time, and had long since stopped being surprised by anything. Diane stood on the human side of the room, with 2 station security officers and a legal recorder running. Nathan stood slightly behind her and to the left. He had been told he could be present, but should not speak unless addressed. The proceedings started formally. The Arbiter read a statement in the Keth diplomatic tongue, which the station's translation system rendered in a flat mechanical voice. He stated that Saya was a ward of the Keth Conclave, that her presence on a human station without official Conclave authorization constituted a violation of interspecies contact protocols, and that he was here to collect her, and to formally note the violation for the record. Diane responded in equally formal language, stating that the child had been found injured and near death, and that the station's acting medical coordinator had responded to a life-threatening emergency. She used every correct term. She cited every filing Nathan had made. She was very good at this. The Arbiter listened without expression. Then he asked to see the child. Saya stepped forward from the side of the room. The Arbiter looked at her. The two junior envoys looked at her. Some small thing shifted in the Arbiter's expression. Surprise, maybe, or something harder to name. Then Saya spoke. She spoke in the Keth diplomatic tongue. Not the common spoken form, not the casual register, but the full formal language, the precise and ancient version that was used in official proceedings and high-level conclave sessions. Nathan could not understand a word of it. The translation system struggled to keep up because the register was above its calibration. But the room changed the moment she began to speak. The two junior envoys went very still. The Arbiter's cool eyes widened just slightly, just enough to notice. Saya spoke for a long time. Her voice was steady. She stood straight, and she did not look away from the Arbiter, and she used every formal grammatical structure perfectly, like someone who had been taught by the very best teachers, or like someone who had grown up hearing this language used at the highest levels. When she finished, the room was quiet. The Arbiter said something short and sharp to the two junior envoys. They both stepped back. Then he looked at Diane, and said in heavily accented, but clear standard English, "The detainment order for the human is withdrawn." Diane blinked. Nathan blinked. "A private meeting," the Arbiter continued, "with the human medical coordinator. It is requested." Diane looked at Nathan. Nathan had no idea what was happening. He had not understood a single word Saya had said. But she was looking at him now with those wide, dark eyes, and the expression on her face was no longer the closed, careful look from before. It was something more open, something that looked in its own alien way, like the same expression Kevin had worn when he set that piece of bread down in the doorway and walked away. Nathan said yes to the private meeting. Then he went to his quarters first and made 2 cups of coffee, because he still did not know what else to do, and because in his experience, a difficult conversation was always slightly easier when something warm was in your hands. He came back to the meeting with both cups. The Arbiter looked at the cups. He looked at Nathan. Nathan held one out. A long pause passed between them. Then the Arbiter took it. "I gave soup to a starving alien child. She returned with a secret no one expected." Part 4. The Secret She Carried. The Arbiter's name was Vorath. He told Nathan this at the beginning of the meeting, quietly, as though it were something he did not share often in official settings. He sat down across from Nathan at the small folding table in the side room, off the reception bay, held the coffee cup in both of his upper hands, and looked at it for a moment before he spoke. "The child told me what you did," he said. His English was careful and slow, chosen deliberately, like a man who knew a language well enough to know which words to trust. "She told me you found her, that you fed her, that you fixed her arm and kept her warm, and asked for nothing." "She needed help," Nathan said. "Yes," Vorath said, "that is what she told me you would say." He set the cup down and looked at Nathan directly. "I need to tell you something," Vorath said, "and I need you to understand that I am telling you this not as a conclave official, but as an old man who is very tired of carrying a heavy thing." Nathan said nothing. He waited. Vorath began slowly. Saya was not an ordinary child. Her full name, translated roughly, meant something like child of the old line, a reference to a specific Keth bloodline that stretched back over 4 centuries. Her family had been, for most of that time, quiet keepers of things that the Conclave did not want kept. Not weapons, not military intelligence, something older and stranger than either of those things. Her parents had died 2 years ago, Officially in a transport accident, Vorath said, with a flatness in his voice that made clear he did not fully believe that version. After that, Seiya had been placed in a conclave youth facility. Vorath paused when he said this and looked at his coffee cup again, and Nathan understood from the pause alone that the facility had not been a kind place. She had escaped 4 months ago. She had been moving through the outer systems since then, staying out of sight, surviving on very little. She had ended up at Veyrath Station because it was off the main lanes, because it was human-run, and because she had calculated that the Conclave would be slower to look for her in human space. She had not planned on collapsing in a cargo corridor. "She is safe now," Nathan said. "She is," Vorath agreed, "but that is not the secret." He reached inside his formal robe and drew out a small flat object, a Keth data carrier, thin as a playing card, dark gray. He set it on the table between them. "She gave this to me," he said. "She was carrying it when she arrived here. She told me to share it with you after she was taken back aboard the ship. She said you had earned the right to understand." Nathan looked at the card. "I cannot read Keth." "I will translate," Vorath said. He put one finger on the card. "This is a record, an old record. It contains texts, oral histories, philosophical writings, and documentation going back over 300 years. It is the work of Seiya's bloodline. They collected it and preserved it over generations at great personal risk." He paused. "It proves," he said slowly, "that the Keth were not always as we are now." Nathan looked up. Vorath nodded. "The Conclave was built on a single idea. That idea is the foundation of our law, our economy, our social structure, our diplomacy. The idea is this: every action is an exchange. Every relationship is a transaction. Every giving is an investment. There is no such thing as a free act. There is only an act whose return has not yet been collected." He said it plainly and without shame, the way you describe something you have lived inside your whole life. "That idea," he continued, "is not ancient. It is not the natural state of our people. It was constructed 340 years ago, after the civil wars that nearly destroyed Keth civilization. A group of leaders rebuilt the society from the ground up. They decided that the old ways, the warm ways, the giving ways, were what had caused the conflicts. That people who gave freely created debts that were never acknowledged, and resentments that were never spoken, and wars that were never prevented. They decided that transparency of exchange was safer than the chaos of generosity." He stopped. Nathan sat with that for a moment. "So they removed the generosity," Nathan said. "They made it illegal," Vorath said, "first in practice, then in law, then in language. There was a word, it was one of the oldest words in our tongue, that meant to give without expectation of return, because the other person needs it. They removed it from the formal lexicon. They removed it from education. They replaced it with a word that means investment in future goodwill, which sounds almost the same, but is not the same at all." Nathan thought about a child drinking soup in a small warm room, and looking confused, deeply genuinely confused, as though something that should have made sense did not. "Seiya's family kept the old word," he said. "They kept everything," Vorath said. "The word, the texts, the histories, the proof. They passed it from parent to child for over 3 centuries, in secret, at the cost of their safety and eventually their lives." He picked up the coffee cup again. And then a child, who had never in her life experienced the thing that word described, crawled into a cargo bay on a human station, and a man she had never met fed her soup, and fixed her arm, and asked for nothing. And she recognized it, from the old descriptions she had heard since she was very small. She recognized it the way you recognize a place you have only seen in photographs. Nathan did not say anything for a long time. Outside, he could hear the distant hum of the Conclave cruiser's engines idling. He could hear the station's recyclers. He could hear somewhere down the hall a burst of laughter from Kevin and a couple of the cargo workers. "What happens to her now?" Nathan finally asked. "She is too visible to be erased quietly," Vorath said. "The incident has been logged. Too many people know she was here. She will be taken back, but she will not be harmed, not with eyes on her." He paused. "I will make sure of that, personally." "And the records?" Nathan asked. Vorath looked at the data carrier on the table. Then he picked it up and put it back inside his robe. "That is a more complicated question," he said, "one that I will be thinking about for some time." He finished his coffee. He stood up, and he was the arbiter again, formal, straight, composed. But he looked at Nathan for one moment before he turned to leave, and said in a voice much quieter than his official tone, "In 40 years of conclave service, no human has ever offered me coffee." Nathan looked at him. "Did you like it?" Vorath considered this with the gravity of a man who had spent 4 decades negotiating between civilizations. "It is very bitter," he said. "Yeah," Nathan said, "it is." A pause. "I will have another cup before I leave," Vorath said. "I gave soup to a starving alien child. She returned with a secret no one expected." Part 5. What Humans Accidentally Started. The Conclave cruiser left Veyrath Station on a Wednesday afternoon. Nathan watched it go from the observation window at the end of the eastern corridor. It was a cold window, in the section where the heating still had not been repaired, and his breath made small clouds in the air. But he stood there until the ship's running lights disappeared into the dark. He went back to work. There were supply shipments to log, and a fuel order to file, and a broken filtration unit in the East Water System that had been on his informal repair list for 2 weeks. He fixed the filtration unit himself that evening, with a wrench and a replacement seal, and a great deal of patience. He did not fix it because it was his job. His job was coordination, not repairs. He fixed it because it needed fixing, and he knew how, and nobody else had gotten to it yet. He did not think about this while he was doing it. It was just a thing he did, the way he did most things. Life on Veyrath Station continued in the way it always had. Loud and a little broken, and full of people who argued about small things and helped each other with big ones. Kevin got promoted to full-time in the cargo bay and celebrated by buying terrible synthetic beer for everyone in the common room. Diane finally got the heating repaired in the eastern corridor, which Nathan appreciated more than he said. A new group of settlers arrived from a colony that had been shut down, tired and carrying too much luggage and not sure what came next, and the station absorbed them the way it always absorbed people, imperfectly and slowly and eventually. Nathan kept doing his job. He thought about Saya sometimes, late at night when the station was quiet. He wondered if she was safe. He wondered about Vorath and the data carrier and the 300 years of hidden records. He wondered, is any of it meant anything in the end? Or if the conclave was simply too large and too old and too set in its ways to be moved by an ancient word and the memory of a bowl of soup. He did not hear anything for 2 years. Then, on a cold morning in March, a message arrived through the official interspecies diplomatic channel, the formal one, the one that required multiple authentication seals and a verification code from the sector liaison office. Diane brought it to him personally, which told him immediately that it was not routine. The message was from the Keth Conclave's Office of Cultural and Historical Records. It stated that an official linguistic review panel had completed a 14-month study of a submitted body of historical texts. It stated that the panel had certified the texts as authentic documents of the early pre-conclave period. It stated that, on the basis of this certification, the panel had voted to formally restore one term to the Keth Standard Lexicon. The term was defined in the document in both Keth script and a certified human translation. It meant to give freely, expecting nothing, because the other person needs it. Nathan read the message twice. Then he read it a third time. At the very bottom, below all the official seals and certification numbers in formal language, there was a short line that was clearly not part of the official document. It was written in plain English, in small handwritten letters, slightly uneven, as though written by someone whose hands were not quite the right shape for a human pen. He taught me what it means. I never forgot the soup. Nathan sat with that for a long time. He folded the document very carefully. He went to his quarters and put it in the small drawer next to his cot, under his old medkit patch from his military days, and a worn photograph of his mother, standing in front of the garden he had not seen in over a decade. Then he went back to work. He did not know, sitting at his desk that morning, what was already beginning to happen in Ket's space. He did not know that Saya was now 18 and had enrolled in the Conclave's diplomatic training program, where she was quietly becoming known for an unusual approach, a way of negotiating that other trainees found strange and instructors found difficult to categorize, because it was based on the idea that the best agreements were the ones where both sides walked away feeling that something had been given rather than traded. He did not know that Vorath had filed a full confidential report before his retirement, one that was now sitting in the archive of the Conclave's Internal Reform Council, read quietly by a small number of senior officials who were old enough to remember being told that the old ways were dangerous, and young enough in spirit to still be wondering if that was true. He did not know that Kevin, now 19, had told the story of the bread he left at a doorway to a girl he was trying to impress, and that she had told it to her sister, and that somehow the story had traveled out along the colony networks in the way that true stories sometimes do, becoming something people passed along in messages and in conversations and in the comment threads of remote outpost forums where people talked about the small things that happened in the far places. He did not know any of this. He knew that the filtration unit was running well, and that the new settlers needed their supply allocations recalculated, and that Kevin had left a cup of coffee on his desk at some point that morning, already cold, with a small note that just said, "Got you the good kind." Nathan picked up the cold coffee and drank it anyway. He thought briefly about a small gray child holding a cup in two hands and making a surprise sound at the taste. He thought about Vorath calling it very bitter in the most serious voice Nathan had ever heard. He thought about his mother's garden and the way she had always grown more tomatoes than the two of them could ever eat, and had given the rest away every summer to anyone who stopped by. She had never thought of it as anything special. It was just what you did when you had enough and someone else did not. Nathan finished the cold coffee. He opened the supply report on his screen and got back to work. Outside the station, the stars were still very far away. But something was moving between them now, quietly and without announcement, carried in old documents and shared meals, and the memory of a word that had been missing for 300 years, and had finally been found again, in the most unlikely of places, on the most ordinary of evenings, in a bowl of simple soup made from old chicken bones and a little salt. It was not a revolution. It did not have a name yet. It did not make the news on any of the major network feeds, and no one gave a speech about it, and there was no ceremony. It was just a small warm thing passing from one pair of hands to another, which, as it turned out, was exactly how it was supposed to work.